Bimbles around the Granada region. Plus Kieran's moved house twice. We'll be back, Bimblers, for another episode, exploring round Lancashire and Cheshire, seeing what there is and where they film Peaky Blinders, by order of the Peaky Bimble.
Just around the corner from my beloved WA4, just over the border of Warrington into Northwich, you'll find Arley Hall. It holds a special role in Peaky Blinders because it's the home of Thomas Shelby, his posh country pile, all paid for by his shady business dealings. In the real world, it's been home to the Warburton family since the 12th century, and via marriage, it's now home to the Warburton Flower family. That's the 11th Viscount Ashbrook, Michael Cloart Warburton Flower, born in 1935. The original Arley Hall would have been one of those black and white Tudor houses, like Speke Hall. In 1758, they put some bricks round it to stop it from falling down and modernise it a little bit. In 1813, it was inherited by a Rowland Egerton Warburton, but he was only 8 at the time, so he waited until he was 21 to have Arley Hall built, the one that you see today, the one where Tommy Shelby lives. He enlisted the help of an architect called George Latham, and between Rowland and George, they wanted to build a Queen Elizabethan style house. Every feature would need to be present in an existing Elizabethan house, exact models, all cobbled together to make Arley Hall. George Latham insisted that it would only cost £5,000, but when it was finished off in 1845, it cost £30,000. That's about £3 million in today's money. George Latham had a habit of doing that. He was sacked from his work at Crewe Hall in favour of Edward Blow, and he was supposed to do some renovation work to Peckforton Castle, but he was let go. Still gave him £2,000. Not bad for doing nothing. However, he did design Nantwich Market. It's just around the corner from his offices on Hospital Street in Nantwich. You might have thought, if you're an avid Peaky Blinders fan like me, that Arley Hall wasn't here anymore. In Series 6, Episode 6, Tommy Shelby blows it up, and he walks away in slow motion while it's, exploding behind him, like they do in Peaky Blinders. But it was all special effects. It's still here, and you can still come and visit. Costs £12 to get in though. If you have small children, you might also recognise Arley Hall as the home of Lord Tumble. That's Mr. Tumble's alter ego. Shine! Not everything here at Arley Hall is featured on the BBC though. There's something interesting around the back that we should probably talk about whilst we're here. Let's bimble. That Rowland Egerton Warburton must have been quite comfortably off, because he had a church built for himself, or a chapel, in the grounds of Arley Hall, just for him and his family, as you do. He must have had more money than Tommy Shelby. This is St Mary's Chapel, and it wasn't designed by George Latham, the fella that designed the house. It was designed by a fella called Anthony Salvin. Anthony Salvin worked under John Pattison in Edinburgh and under John Nash. Lest we forget that John Nash is the fellow that designed Marble Arch and Clarence House down in that London. Eventually Anthony Salvin struck out on his own, and he designed All Saints Church in Runcorn, which we've bimbled to in the past a few times. The main parts of this chapel were finished off in 1845, but by 1857 Rowland Egerton Warburton must have had some money burning a hole in his back pocket, because he had it altered. He had an entrance put on, not by George Latham or Anthony Salvin, but by a fella called George Edmund Street. That's the fella that designed the Royal Courts of Justice in London, a fella who's buried at St Paul's Cathedral, just over the way from George Gilbert Scott and Charles Barry. You'd think that Rowland would have been satiated. He built himself a chapel and a big posh house, but in 1886 he paid for St Cross Church in Appleton, where we started out today. That was designed by Edmund Kirby, another big church builder. He knew them all. Perhaps Rowland Egerton Warburton had some things keeping him up at night, a little bit like Tommy Shelby. Up a great big hill in Lancaster, you'll find Williamson Park, and in Williamson Park, you'll find the Ashton Memorial. It rather dominates the landscape of Lancaster. You can see it from the M6 and from the West Coast Main Line if you pass in. It was built between 1907 and 1909 at a cost of £87,000, which, if we adjust for inflation, is about £8.7 million in today's money. A mere drop in the ocean to the fella that had this commission though. When he died in 1930, he had £9.5 million in the bank. That's about £500 million in today's money. That man was Lord Ashton, or James Williamson, hence the Williamson Park bit, although we have his father to thank for that. He was the one-time mayor of Lancaster. But the Ashton Memorial is all James's idea. It's actually a memorial to his dead wife, his second wife Jessie, who died in 1904. He didn't have much luck with his wives. His first wife, Margaret, died in 1877. And then he took up with a fellow widower, Jessie Henrietta Hume, and she died in 1904. And he built this lovely memorial to her. He did remarry in 1909 to a woman called Florence Whaley. She must have been a little bit put out. When are you going to build me a memorial? Where's my massive memorial? When am I going to get one? Well, probably when you die. And fortunately, or unfortunately, she managed to outlive James Williamson. He died in 1930. They call this the Taj Mahal of the North, because it's just like the Taj Mahal in India. It's a monument built to someone's dead wife. It's actually the second largest monument built to someone's dead wife in the whole world, after the Taj Mahal. Pot fact. But what of Peaky Blinders? What did they film here? Well, nothing on the outside, but the inside of the Ashton Memorial was used as Gina Gray's house. It's supposed to be in Boston. Gina Gray is Michael Gray's wife, you know, the American woman, as played by Anya Taylor-Joy. And she's inside the Ashton Memorial, dancing to a little bit of jazz, having a few drinks, and Tommy turns up and has a few stern words with her. They put up some net curtains for the filming, so you couldn't see out the windows and see that you were in Lancaster and not in Boston. This is Astley Green Colliery, or as it's known these days, the Lancashire Mining Museum. We've bimbled here in the past, in my Lee Bimble, the first one. It all came to be when the coal was running out in the Irwell Valley, and the Clifton and Kersley mines were running out of coal pit by pit, one by one. In 1907, they came here to Astley Green to dig a borehole to see if there's any coal underneath the ground, and there was 2 seams of coal, one called the Worsley 4 Feet and one called Astley Pit, deep, deep, deep down in the ground. They stretched for miles, going underneath the Manchester and Liverpool Railway, underneath something called Chat Moss, just near Culcheth. According to my big book of Bimble, in 1933 there were 1,631 men working under the ground here at Astley Green, and another 492 working up top. There were women that worked here sorting out the coal, right up until the 1950s. It all changed hands a few times. It stopped being the Clifton and Kersley mine and became Manchester Collieries, and then in 1947 it became part of the National Coal Board, or the NCB. In 1970 it was deemed unprofitable, so it was closed, but they kept the big pit headgear and they kept a big steam engine. You can go and visit it. It's the Lancashire Mining Museum now, free to get in. But what of Peaky Blinders? Well, in Series 4, Episode 2, they filmed an episode called Heathens in this field behind me. They were cremating John Shelby, that's Tommy Shelby's brother. They set fire to him in one of them gypsy caravans just behind me. John Shelby was killed in the episode before by the New York Mafia on Christmas Day. No respect. There was a bit of special effects trickery on the wide shot. They superimposed that tobacco warehouse in Liverpool, because this was all supposed to be Small Heath in Birmingham, just to the rear of Charlie Strong's yard, by the canal. But you can still see the pit headgears and the trees to the side. In fact, they did some filming inside of the museum. The New York Mafia were keeping their eye on Tommy Shelby. They were going to try and assassinate him, but it was all part of Tommy Shelby's plan to cremate his brother in the open and draw out the New York Mafia. He was much too clever for him. He had one of his pals, Aberama Gold, standing watch, and he bumped off a few of the New York Mafia goons. Let's bimble. This chap could have been in the Peaky Blinders, what with his flat cap. And if someone made a statue of me that looks as little like me as this does Fred Dibner, I might slash him up with the razor blades in my flat cap, by order of the steamy climbers. Let's bimble. This is the old magistrates court here in Bolton, on something called Le Mans Crescent. They stopped using it in 2017, but the building was built between 1932 and 1939 by a group of architects called Bradshaw, Gas and Hope. Bradshaw, Gas and Hope started out as just Bradshaw. That's Jonas James Bradshaw. He had a practice here in Bolton on something called Nelson Square. He was joined by his nephew, John Bradshaw Gas, and eventually one of their apprentices, Arthur John Hope, made his way up through the company to become a partner, thus producing Bradshaw, Gas and Hope. They had quite the reputation for hiring apprentices. They hired a chap called John Parkinson, who worked at Bradshaw, Gas and Hope until he was 21, at which point he got on a boat and went over to America. He set up his own practice in Seattle, and he built the City Hall in Los Angeles. He specialised in high-rise buildings. But Bradshaw, Gas and Hope built things a lot closer to home, according to my big book of Bimble. That would be Grand Central Hall in Liverpool, and the Royal Exchange in Manchester, Lee Spinners, we bimbled there a few weeks back, and Chesterfield Town Hall. We'll have to do a bimble in Chesterfield, go and look at the Crooked Spire. But what of Peaky Blinders? Well, they filmed it in Series 6, Episode 2, and Tommy Shelby walks out of one of these buildings, which is supposed to be the Shelby Sanatorium for Sick Children. In fact, Thomas Shelby's daughter Ruby is in that sanatorium. She had TB. Not only that, but they doubled up the filming from a different angle just down the street. It was used as the home of Diana Mitford. That's Oswald Mosley's flirty, feisty, fascist fancy piece. That's easy for me to say. If you're wondering what the old magistrates' courts used to look like on the inside, well, you need to watch Phoenix Nights, Series 2, Episode 2, when they have the tribunal about the fire at the Phoenix Club. Kenny Dalglish Sr. tells the court all about Brian Potter's military service in Vietnam and his glittering boxing career. In Series 5, Episode 6, in an episode called Mr. Jones, the Stockport Plaza becomes Bingley Hall in Birmingham. Britain's pound shop Hitler, Oswald Mosley, was giving one of his fascist rallies here with the black shirts. It seems extraordinary to say these days, but before World War II, some people in America and in Britain liked Adolf Hitler and liked fascism. It was just another political ideology, like socialism and communism and liberalism and conservatism. Just another ism. It was Oswald Mosley that set up the British Union of Fascists in 1932. He was very impressed with Mussolini. Oswald Mosley started out his political career on behalf of the Conservative Party. He was the MP for Harrow. He was the youngest MP to enter the Houses of Parliament. Not the youngest MP. That was a fellow called Joseph Sweeney on behalf of Sinn Féin. It was the Irish struggles that caused Oswald Mosley to leave the Conservative Party and be an independent, and then eventually join the Labour Party. He was the Labour MP for Smethwick in Birmingham, which is why he's fictionalised in Peaky Blinders. In real life, he became unhappy with the Labour Party, and he formed a new party called the New Party. Their beliefs got increasingly more fascist as they went along. When World War II broke out, people turned against Oswald Mosley and fascism, rightly so. But that didn't stop him. In 1959, he tried to become the MP for North Kensington. He was obviously anti-immigration, and he wanted all the people from the Caribbean rounded up and sent back to the Caribbean. He even proposed that mixed-race marriages would be banned. He was a right bed. Stockport Plaza was designed by a chap called William Thornley, and it was built between 1932 and 1933. It's a fabulous example of Art Deco. That's why they've used it on the small screen. It was in Life on Mars, it was in Peaky Blinders, it was in Eric and Ernie, a right Bobby Dazzler. It was used for bargain hunts as well.